grande alegria receber o professor Michael Apple em sua segunda grande conferência do IAT, dedicada ao tema tão urgente da educação e se a educação pode transformar a sociedade. Eu gostaria de fazer antes meus agradecimentos, queria agradecer aqui na pessoa da pró-reitora adjunta de graduação, a professora Maria José Flores, agradecer todo o apoio da reitora Sandra Goulart a todas as iniciativas do IAT e nesse trabalho tão importante que são essas iniciativas das cátedras. Aqui a cátedra Magda Soares, que recebe então o nosso segundo catedrático. O primeiro, ano passado, foi o professor Antônio Nova, o professor Michael Apple é o segundo catedrático da Magda Soares, e essa cátedra, pelos temas que ela desenvolve em suas pesquisas, em suas iniciativas acadêmicas, ela presta um tributo ao legado da nossa grande mestra, professora Magda Soares, nesses temas tão urgentes ligados à educação e à justiça social, que é o tema por excelência que trabalha o professor Michael Apple. Eu gostaria também de cumprimentar o professor Júlio Emílio, que é o coordenador da cátedra Magda Soares, pelo seu trabalho dedicado à frente da coordenação dessa cátedra e que também fez uma programação intensa com o professor Michael Apple durante aqui a sua estadia. Nós então estamos encerrando a programação de atividades com essa grande conferência do professor Michael Apple aqui no IAT e na UFMG. O professor Michael Apple, ele desenvolve justamente pesquisas na área de educação, mas nesse trabalho muito difícil e relevante, que é a educação e a pesquisa de excelência em diálogo com outros setores. Então, em diálogo com os movimentos sociais, em diálogo com os sindicatos, em diálogo com os formadores de políticas públicas. E uma das missões nossas, especificamente no IAT, é de promover pesquisas nessa interface e nesse diálogo intersetorial. Eu estive agora no encontro dos diretores de estudos avançados em Gana, na África, e o trabalho dessa cátedra foi apresentado, viu, professor Júlio, como um dos trabalhos exemplares no desenvolvimento dessa intersetorialidade, ou seja, a universidade em suas pesquisas tomando como desafio esse enfrentamento dessas questões sociais que são tão pungentes. O professor Michael Apple, então, ele é emérito da Universidade de Wisconsin-Madison e ele já eu já apresentei aqui na sua primeira conferência, ele dá, então, né, no dia de hoje, continuidade ao tema que ele trabalhou na sua primeira conferência. E a sua presença reafirma, então, essa vocação da cátedra Magda Soares, nesse diálogo que há também, além de transdisciplinar, é também transnacional, né? Então, os institutos de estudos avançados têm essa missão de acolher pesquisadores externos à nossa instituição para dialogar e interagir com os pesquisadores locais. Então, é isso que motiva e motivou a presença do professor Apple aqui na nossa universidade, pela Cátedra Magda Soares, como titular da Cátedra Magda Soares. Então, em nome do IAT, eu agradeço especialmente ao professor Michael Apple e também a todos e todas vocês pela presença. Eu passo agora a palavra à professora Maria José, que, em nome da reitora, vai dizer algumas palavras para vocês.
Boa noite a todos. Quero cumprimentar a Patrícia, o Júlio, né, por essa jornada de trabalho intensa e bonita com o professor Michael Apple, a quem nós reiteramos todos os agradecimentos, uma presença viva, ativa nessa universidade. Em nome da reitora, eu trago esses cumprimentos. A reitora hoje teve uma agenda intensa e ainda está nessa agenda, ela está aqui na universidade, então oportunamente vai passar aqui para cumprimentar a todos e especialmente ao nosso convidado. E quero cumprimentar, aqui eu estou vendo estudantes, colegas de professores das diversas unidades, estou vendo também professores da comissão gestora da cátedra, assim como da comissão executiva. Vejo também os meus colegas aqui das instituições mineiras, porque para falar da justificar por que eu estou representando a reitora, porque desde de manhã ela está na jornada. Hoje ela fez a condução de uma reunião com as 19 instituições públicas mineiras, que tem sido movida e movimentada em torno de uma ideia de uma política de formação de professores articulado com as escolas de educação básica, para a qual essa cátedra, a Cátedra Magda Soares, hoje financiada pela Fundep e instalada no IEAT, é fundamental. Na verdade, seguir os exemplos da cátedra, ela nos inspira para seguir o exemplo da própria professora Magda Soares. E a reitora, juntamente com toda a equipe, num empenho muito grande para que a gente possa fazer essas articulações. Então, professor Michael Apple, hoje nós citamos você de manhã, de tarde, e não nos cansamos, estamos aqui presentes nessa noite para poder continuar nos inspirando, porque cada momento é uma conquista. E nós temos hoje, nessa rede mineira, 20 escolas estaduais, que o Estado de Minas Gerais, hoje o secretário, frente a essa iniciativa da reitora, reafirmou o compromisso de conceder condições para que os professores que atuem com os nossos estudantes, a gente possa fazer um trabalho mais colaborativo, mas reconhecendo o trabalho dos professores da educação básica nessa interação. Isso é uma ambição nossa, é uma missão, é uma ambição e é uma missão, e nesse momento de poder encerrar essa jornada sua aqui, fazendo força para que esse projeto possa seguir adiante, não há como ser instigado pela pergunta que você tem nos provocado ao longo desse momento. Então, em nome da reitora, eu te agradeço imensamente pela colaboração e pelas profundas reflexões que tem nos trazido, e desejo a todos aqui presentes que possam se alimentar dessas reflexões e também nos ajudar nesse movimento intersetorial que a Patrícia tão bem descreveu, que a Cátedra Magda Soares tem fomentado e que expande para além de setores internos da universidade para todas as instituições públicas mineiras e, quiçá, também as instituições privadas. Que a gente tenha uma linda noite de reflexão e de produção aqui que nos inspire infinitamente. Muito obrigada e aproveitem bastante o professor Michael Apple.
Obrigada, Maria. Passa agora, então, a palavra ao professor Júlio Emílio, coordenador da Cátedra Magda Soares, do IAT UFMG.
Boa noite. Pessoal, eu gostaria, na verdade, de agradecer, né, a todas as pessoas que estiveram direta e indiretamente envolvidas nesta organização da agenda do professor Michael Apple. Eu quero começar agradecendo, claro, a nossa magnífica reitora, professora Sandra Goulart, e aqui então eu a cumprimento, não é? Sendo representada pela professora Maria José Flores, que é a nossa pró-reitora adjunta de graduação. Agradecer a professora Patrícia Kawark, que é a diretora, não é, do Instituto de Estudos Avançados Transdisciplinares da UFMG, o IEAT, e também a equipe, não é, que trabalha conosco no IEAT, não é, em nome da Tatiana Queiroz, eu gostaria então de cumprimentar e agradecer, não é, todas as colegas, os colegas que trabalham conosco lá no IEAT e dão todo o suporte necessário para o funcionamento da cátedra. Cumprimentar as minhas colegas, os meus colegas que junto comigo coordenam a Cátedra Magda Soares, e cumprimentar também, não é, todas as demais pessoas envolvidas no IEAT, nas demais cátedras. O IEAT acabou de organizar, né, de inaugurar, né, uma nova cátedra, a Cátedra de Conhecimento, Saberes Tradicionais, não é, que é uma cátedra belíssima. Foi sexta-feira passada a inauguração dessa cátedra, então também cumprimentar todos os nossos colegas que estão envolvidos com o IEAT. Cumprimentar vocês, né, que estão aqui presentes, muito obrigado a todas as pessoas presentes. E quando nós pensamos na agenda do professor Michael Apple, eu fiz questão de colocar uma grande conferência no turno da noite, né? Eu sou um professor do curso noturno, né? Toda vez que tem reunião de setor para distribuição de encargos, eu peço para dar aulas no noturno, no curso noturno. Eu ajudei a criar, né, as licenciaturas noturnas aqui nesta universidade. Isso era no ano lá de 1992, quando essa universidade, ali por volta das 18 horas, né, apagava as luzes, fechava as portas e praticamente não funcionava, né, no período noturno. E aí nós tivemos a ousadia, lá no início dos anos 1990, de criar os primeiros cursos de licenciatura noturno da UFMG. E como eu estava ainda na condição de estudante, envolvido com a criação dos cursos de licenciatura noturno, eu tenho esse compromisso com os cursos noturnos. Então, ter uma grande conferência à noite era uma exigência, né, da minha parte. Então, fico feliz que mesmo, né, no dia 9 de dezembro, tivemos um feriado ontem, estamos aí bem próximo do ho-ho-ho. Nós sabemos o quão difícil é esta época do ano, tão corrida, e ainda por cima chovendo, não é, aqui em várias regiões da cidade, da região metropolitana. Eu até recebi aqui uma mensagem de uma pessoa que queria muito estar aqui, mas a chuva acabou impedindo que ela viesse. Ou seja, eu acho que, né, nós estamos aqui com um público bastante importante para esta segunda grande conferência, nesta última semana do professor Michael Apple conosco, não é? E eu disse isso na sexta-feira passada, quando nós tivemos o seminário sobre as condições do trabalho docente, que eu aprendi com o movimento estudantil. Desde a minha participação no movimento estudantil, eu aprendi a celebrar as presenças e não lamentar as ausências. Então, eu agradeço mais uma vez todas as pessoas, né, que fizeram aí um sacrifício para vir e estar presente aqui hoje. Muitíssimo obrigado. Um agradecimento também para as minhas alunas do curso de pedagogia, né, que estão aqui presentes. A gente discutiu isso lá no início do semestre, né, o quanto que o público noturno, né, muitas vezes não tem, não é, a oportunidade de participar de eventos como estes. Então, eu agradeço aqui as minhas alunas, os meus alunos do curso de pedagogia que estão aqui presentes. Pessoal, no mais, é também agradecer finalmente o professor Michael Apple, não é? Pela sua disponibilidade, pela sua seriedade, pelo seu profissionalismo. O professor Michael Apple nos atendeu, não é, dentro daquilo que nós demandamos, foi definida uma agenda conjuntamente com o professor, mas ele sempre muito disposto, não é? Então, Michael, fica aqui o nosso agradecimento e o nosso reconhecimento, né, neste um mês de trabalho que nós tivemos com o professor Michael Apple, que tanto ajudou, né, a Cátedra Fundep Magda Soares de Educação Básica do IEAT-UFMG, como também ajudou a nossa comunidade universitária na UFMG. Então, mais uma vez, muitíssimo obrigado. Eu passo a palavra de volta para a Patrícia.
Então, eu encerro aqui essa sessão de abertura da conferência e convido a professora Maria Flores a tomar seu lugar, eu mesma. Deixo aqui o professor Júlio para conduzir depois o debate e convido o professor Michael Apple para a sua conferência. Muito obrigada.
I want to begin in a relatively strange way, and that is with a note of sadness. When I agreed to come here because of my respect for the institution and for Giulio, who was a student in many of my classes at Wisconsin, and my teacher about certain things that were crucial about Brazil. This is the last week. It is my last big lecture. I'm both pleased to have been here and say this as a form of honor of the Suarez chair and the program that stands behind it in many ways. But as some of you know, and again, I will speak personally, I take these things very seriously. I went to night school to become a teacher. I was born in a poor family, the equivalent in many ways of a poor working class, almost favela. I'm the first generation finishing secondary school in my family. And to me, education was a result of struggle that never ends. And I must admit, coming here reminds me of why Brazil has become a center of these struggles. And with a little joke, I would ask you if you would kindly go to Washington, D.C., and if you would help us arrest our czar in a way that shows that you are more democratic than the belly of the beast in the north of the Atlantic Ocean. That ends my lament in some ways, but there's one other thing I want to mention about my connections to this great nation. As some of you have heard in my introduction to other lectures, half of my family is in Brazil. They were communist exiles working in the factories in Kyiv and in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And they had to leave because of the pogroms. They fled to Manchester to work in the textile mills there and then moved to the United States. At least half of them did, but one half could not get legal visas to the United States. So they purchased false visas to one nation, the nation of Brazil, in 1890. We have a record that they went on a boat to Santos. We do not know their last names. So if I smile at you and run from the stage and say, "Oh my God, you look like my grandmother," you will understand that I am not being impolite, but finally I can rest easy about finding my place of my family in this nation. So don't run yet, but if I do jump off the stage, quickly lock the door and move. All right. In my first lecture, I urged us to take very seriously that the right is an ascendancy in this nation and in my own and throughout the world. And I suggested, I argued, I hope powerfully enough, that we must think about the question that stands behind every aspect of pedagogy, didactics, curriculum, policy, and what our daily life should be as educators. And I gave a lecture on the tasks of the critical scholar activist, asking us to answer the question, not only what schools should do, but what is our personal responsibility in these struggles. And among those struggles, if you will, I said the first task was to tell the truth about the relations of dominance and subordination in our societies and our struggles against those relations as educators, as activists, as community members. And I urged us to engage in a number of tasks, telling the truth, which is very difficult at times, and as I'll show in a minute, very risky for real people. And I said part of the task, the second one, is to look for possibilities of interruption. That is, the right creates spaces for us to act. And there are times there are victories. In fact, that will be the text, the sense of my lecture today. And the third is what really gives form to this lecture today, and that is to be the critical secretaries of the attempt to fight back, to build a critically democratic education that responds to the needs of communities, responds to those who are immiserated by the economy, by the cultural forms and political forms that dominate many of our societies. So I want to start by reminding us that we have two tasks, large ones. One is to understand what is going on. IEAT is one of the most important things about that. It asks us to see connections, to understand the relations that everyone lives in, and to build, if you will, new discourses that enable us to understand these relations better in academic areas and in other parts of our lives. So I take seriously that task. But I want the second task to be part of the lecture tonight, and that is the politics of interruption. I'm going to switch gears and not quote Gramsci tonight, which hurts very badly. And I know those of you are waiting for me to tell another Gramsci story. I will, by the way, but I will not be quoting Gramsci quite as much. But I want to be a storyteller tonight. I will tell the story of 3 and perhaps 4 attempts to answer the question, can education change society? Not in abstract terms, but in real terms. Some of these I have been involved in, as well as my wife, Professor Rima Apple, who is in the back. Rima is a historian of medicine and of women's health and bodies, and is my teacher about many things. But part of the task then, in many ways, is to tell stories that provide us with possibilities. Some of these stories have yeses and nos at one and the same time. But I will end, if there is time, with 2 stories of success. Much depends on the time itself. I won't joke about buying pizza for everyone and we will be here till midnight. But that is the normal joke I will say. And of course, then I will ask you to pay for it, but that's a different issue. Okay. So the task is to tell stories from what we call the front lines. What does it look like nationally and internationally when we try to put in place the lessons that we have learned? Now, as I've said before, the word we is the most difficult word in these presentations. We is not a noun, it too is a verb. It needs to be created. It is not there automatically. And part of my task will be to show the complexities of the we that we would build. Okay. Before I get into the stories, I want to remind us of what is happening. Those of you who have heard me talk know that this is very important. I will not spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on this, but I want to remind us what is going on here in my own nation with Donald Trump, God help us, and elsewhere. I promise, I hope I hold to this, that I will not say our czar's name anymore. He gets too much attention already. So the question begins, can education change society? And as I've argued many times, the right is answering it constantly. For them, education is already a prime element in changing society. They are struggling over curriculum. They're struggling over teachers. They're struggling over privatization. They understand that you build a future by destroying the present. So they engage in what I've called sliding signifiers in a process of what Stuart Hall calls disarticulation and rearticulation, stealing our voices, our language, and changing its meaning. And as I've argued repeatedly in my month here, what they have done is to desocialize the words that give meaning to our lives. Words like freedom, democracy. So our sense of democracy is thick. It is social. It is collective. It is joining together to form a we. For them, democracy is individual choice on a market. So they want to engage in a process of building historical amnesia. Forget the social. We will have individual rights. And only when individuals make decisions, not collectively, for profit, not for social good, will we have democracy. And behind this are visions of vouchers and privatization, democracy as choice on a market. And we are seeing this in the massive censorships of books, in Mums for Liberty, in taking books out of classrooms, in firing teachers in many nations for daring to teach about enslavement, daring to teach about women's struggles, daring to teach about trans, daring to in any way restore the collective memory of the work that teachers and others have been doing. And because of this, they are threatening teachers. They're taking over school boards, the democratically elected forms. They are denying funds for legislators. So as an example, in my own city, Madison, Wisconsin, in my own state, Wisconsin, the home of American socialism, we have been told at my university and every school district, you must cut your budget no less than 10%. If that means that you must fire teachers, that you cannot have special needs aides in schools, that you have to buy books that are not simply textbooks, that you need to hire teacher aides and assistants from the poor communities to come in to work with the students, none of that can we afford. But we can afford to send 1 out of every 4 African-American young men to prison. All right? So we want to understand what is happening. And there's a creation of my least favorite thing, gated communities around our children. So the fastest growing school reform, by the way, in the world, and certainly in the United States, is homeschooling. 7 million children in the United States are being homeschooled. Homeschooling started as a racist program when the Supreme Court of the United States ordered schools not to be like South Africa. And the United States was very much like South Africa. We had segregated schools and segregated classrooms. And when the Supreme Court ruled that black children and white children, black teachers and white children, black principals and white children had to work together, parents removed their children from schools and started homeschooling. Now that also has created historical amnesia. But none of this loss of memory, is new. I need to tell a little story. This is a letter that Michael Apple received in the last 2 years of my public school teaching in a small, very, very conservative rural farm community of 1,700 people when I was a child in 1966. You're supposed to laugh now. Okay, anyway. You'll notice that it is like a kidnap letter. It says, Mr. Apple, beware, we watch your step. This is not new. This is my introduction to teaching. This is teaching in an all-white farm community that refused to have people of color live there. And as someone who was a teacher who believed in democracy, I would try and use it, form community knowledge, and we tried to get books in from the library that taught the histories of women, of people of color, of this farm community, of immigrants coming from Brazil, Mexico, Chile, Argentina, Germany, Italy, France, communists from Russia. Oh my God. That's a complicated story. Instead, it was forbidden. I locked my door. Okay? This is not new. This is the restoration of other people's memories as an attack on our daily lives. Am I clear about that? Okay. So I want us to think about how do we act back practically. And I want to tell at least 3, and if there's time, 4 stories. They are varied nations because this is not only Brazil. It is not only schools without parties in Brazil. It is all over. I want to tell a story from India in a rural area, trying to change the lives of poor people, of lower caste, and especially the lives of girls. By changing the curriculum, by providing safety. And I want to take us away from schools to other pedagogic sites, to South Korea, who are doing pedagogy in communities to supplement schools and making history that is very dangerous and damaging visible again, so that people do not lose the memory of the struggles of women again in their daily lives. Then I want to give us a story that has no contradictions whatsoever. My favorite story, and the story of a school that continues to teach me and my students and thousands of teachers and community activists in the United States. I want to take us into the 3rd poorest city in my own nation, the United States, and look at the teaching of a subject that I think is absolutely central, mathematics. I think it's actually quite important for children to learn that. And I want to show how that was taught in a way that stopped the building of a new juvenile prison. It is one of the finest examples I know of the power of critical education. If there is time, and if you are patient, this should be about midnight now, I will tell the story of an alliance I have built with ultra-conservative evangelical Christians, with critical educators, like many of us in this room, with teachers, to stop the selling of children in school for profit. If there is time, because that is both a yes and a no, and a very complicated story about did Michael Apple do good in forming an alliance with something that many of us think are problematic, to say the least. Okay, that's the agenda. Can I go on now? Okay. That was a rhetorical question. Don't just nod. It's already been decided. Some of you know that I make jokes. I've said this now at every lecture. My last name is Apple. I spent many years teaching in schools. My first 2.5 years was as a substitute teacher, and I walked into a classroom every day, a new classroom. Sometimes it was a kindergarten classroom, sometimes it was girls' physical education, and for 4 months it was calculus, which I had never had. If you walk into a new classroom every day and say, "Hello, kids, my name is Mr. Apple," you better have the worst sense of humor in the history of the world in order to survive. So as I said, though, at my other lectures, do not misinterpret the seriousness of what I say. Rhetorical teaching styles are to keep interest. The real issue is, did we succeed in changing the lives of real people? Okay. So I want to focus now on the poor students of what in India are called unscheduled castes. Okay, these are rural people. Now it's important you realize I am talking now about adding something to the we. Normally we say it's class, it's gender, it's race, it's sexuality in the body, it's labeled disabilities. There are 100 million people in India trying to go to schools in what are called unscheduled castes. Below the lowest of the castes, there are people who are not even seen as worthy of being labeled. They're often dark-complected, they're often indigenous, and this is a school system that is trying very hard to change the lives of people, especially young girls, who are rightly frightened to walk outside at night because of compulsory masculinity, where it is okay to sexually rape a young girl. So I want to be very honest about what the fight is about here. It is schooling, but it is also about the sexual violence. And if you read any newspaper stories about this or listened to the news about India, this is not cute at all. Okay? All right. So these are poor students of unscheduled castes. And they have been influenced by Paulo Freire, forming the People's Science Movement, and a book of mine that has been translated here called Democratic Schools, which is a book that is me acting with Jim Beam of helping teachers write the stories of their successes. And the major focus is on girls and making a better present and future possible. Now, the government is a communist government. There are 17 different communist parties in India. So when we say communist, it can mean anything. But this is a group that is profoundly influenced by we must sacrifice and we must continue to sacrifice. And it's a vision, if you will, of the CP, of the Communist Party, that is powerfully democratic, unlike some aspects of it. And this is a government that's been willing to make very real financial sacrifices. So they have put millions and millions of US dollars into schools. And they've been working with teachers, social mobilizations and movements, with what's called the People's Science Network, and communities very similar to the community schools of Porto Alegre and some of the school reforms in Salvador and elsewhere, and in Minas Gerais. Okay? Strong community involvement, deciding what to do. And interestingly enough, they have decided something that if you ever have had to call an airline about a bad ticket, or you want information on it, in much of the North, you get someone from India or the Philippines. Okay? And it is often men, especially in this part of India, or women with college degrees. Okay, it's very interesting. So the jobs that are available that are not well paid, but they're the step towards professionalization. That is the vision. So many women will take these jobs because, as we say, it is sort of white collar. Okay? Okay. So they focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics for girls because girls are denied those subjects. Many young women are not even allowed by their parents to take the examinations that young students here did the practice test on in the last couple of weeks. Girls are forbidden by their families to take it because they have brothers, and schools are for the boys. Some of the girls are actually in the North sold into sexual slavery to support the family and support the brothers so they can stay and not work and someday maybe get into a university. You'll forgive me for speaking very honestly about this, but I want people to understand what the struggles are about, since it is not only about schools, it's about young girls' bodies, which we will come back to. It's about patriarchal relations. And it's about what teachers can do to take risks and whether the state itself is simply an arm of capital. In this state, it is not. It's one of the rare states in the world that says, we will not just be rhetorical. Here is money to try and do this. Okay? So they want girls to spend a lot of time on computers, to become computer literate, so that they can then be seen as economically viable to take these jobs in the call centers, not because they love call centers and are romantic about it, but they see this as a ladder. Can we get girls not to be the subjects of sexual violence, to contribute financially to a family, to interrupt the patriarchal norms of the families and have jobs themselves? Okay? And the central government, I'll come back to this, but after all of this success, the central government in Delhi was finally pressured to increase the funding for STEM and for computer literacy. I'll tell what happened after that. Okay? All right. So far, okay? Okay. Whoops. Okay. So, quickly do this just a second. Okay. Whoops. It is not doing the form. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to just do this verbally. Somehow there's one page that is missing. That's not a good thing. Okay. Here's what happened. Rima Apple and Michael Apple have been working with the government here in India for 3 years. We are going there being taught, but we are working in the villages. And you have to understand, think of this as Porto Alegre in weather, or worse, north above Salvador. It is in Fahrenheit 107 degrees, and we are taken by the State Ministry of Education vehicle. It's an old vehicle, and I assure you the air conditioning is not working. And we are dropped off in this village. And the sound we hear first is the sound of generators because the school does not have electricity. And as we walk, we are told the story of all of the computers that have been sent by Sony and Sanyo and some Indian manufacturers. And we are there to help evaluate from the state how these things are working and whether this is very, very good for young women. And Rima, who is a professor of women's health, is deeply involved with me on this. And the task is for us to share wisdom on these kinds of things. So envision us getting out of this older car, walking to a school where there are no windows, no electricity, no air conditioning whatsoever. It makes some of the schools in favelas look like they are advantaged. That's how bad this situation is. Okay? We are there to look, to learn, to talk with the teachers. There are new computers in every classroom. The girls are about 12 to 14 years old. The classrooms have perhaps 50 or 60 students in them. There are old chairs with some desks, and it's hot, and it feels like it's going to rain. All right. Rima and I look at this, and at first we are thrilled. Look at all these computers. It is the first computers in the village ever. Teachers have been paid extra for 2 months of extra pay to become computer literate themselves. It is a very different vision of teachers, and the teachers are enthusiastic about it. We are beginning to go like this, saying, this must be something that is learned by UFMG. This is powerful. I had to say that. That's actually, in many ways, true, actually, given what is going on here. Okay. Rima and I are looking, and after about an hour, Rima and I look at each other in a way that normally communicates we need to talk. So we go to the side over here, and Rima looks at me, and I look at her, and we say, are you seeing what I am seeing? And I say, yes. All of these computers in this co-ed classroom, which is the first co-education in the history of this small village, since girls had their own underfunded education. All of the seats by the computers, it is the boys, not the girls. Let me repeat that. It is boys, not girls. It turns out, we then ask the girls, and we ask the teachers. We should have asked the boys to get a side that would have made us very, very angry. And the girls are telling us one simple thing. And the teachers are telling us one simple thing. There are no toilets. Let me repeat that. There are no toilets in the school. I don't mean that there's outdoor toilets. There are no toilets. If you have to urinate, the boys go to the back of the building, and I quote them, we pee against the wall. The girls have nowhere to urinate. The school uniform is a sort of decaying sari, a wraparound skirt. Let me ask you a serious question. If you were a 12-year-old young girl in a nation where sexual violence and rape is seen by many men as legitimate rights of men over women, would you go behind anywhere and lift up your skirt to urinate? So the girls do not drink anything during the day when it is 107 degrees Fahrenheit, and they fall asleep at their desks, or they faint, or 50% of the girls do not go to school because they might have to go to the toilet. So the hidden absences are crucial. So here we have money being spent, powerfully so, with a state that is fundamentally rejecting masculinity that is imposed, where the community itself has a tradition of boys first, not girls, of girls not finishing even primary school, of sacrificing funding for teachers to learn new subject material for themselves. And what is happening now is that girls can't come because of the architecture of the school. All right? This is a yes and a no at one and the same time. When we speak to the governor of the state, I want to say, you have made immense sacrifices. And the legislature, which was partly rightist and certainly not pleased with caste getting more money, is applauded. Okay. There are no toilets. So here we have a vision of education that I think everyone in this room would say, that's an advance. It puts women's body, women's bodies, young girls' bodies, in the forefront of the curriculum that is on stuff that girls almost never get. The teachers are prepared, the computers are there, they're paid for, they are ready. The boys get it, the girls can't be there because they have to pee. There's more to schooling than the curriculum, than the teaching, than the computers. There are things called bodies. And you don't have to be Foucault to understand bodies. It helps to understand it. But the absent presence of one room destroys the curriculum, the teaching, and real lives of these young women. All right? When I say this, I actually break out in a sweat. If you can now feel my back, seriously, this is so painful. We told this story to Delhi, to the state. The community mobilized. One of the positive things. The communities in rural areas mobilized. And the current government in Delhi under Modi said, we will pay for more computers, more toilets. We will build toilets for the boys. Let me repeat that. There are now new toilets in schools for the boys. I rest my case, Your Honor. Okay. Story one. Let's go beyond the school. This is a photograph from Korea, where education is not only going on in the schools themselves, it is going on in public spaces. So this is a form of public pedagogy. This is what you're seeing is Seoul in South Korea. And women's movements have worked with the illegal teachers' union. It's actually just won its court battle. It's now a legal teachers' union. And 1/4 of all the buses in Korea now have this thing. So these are bus stops that you're looking at. Okay? This is a statue of what is called a comfort woman. People know what that is? No. During the Japanese occupation and invasion and murder in South Korea, the Japanese looked at young girls and said, "You're very attractive. We would like you to come and give comfort to the occupying troops of Japanese young men, and you will be prostitutes. You will not be paid for it, but we will show you respect for 1 week a month. I need not tell you what that week is for if you have inhabited women's bodies." Okay? And these memories are struggled over. There are still comfort women who are alive, and they have demanded that Japan pay reparations for the years of the occupation. Right? So this is a brilliant pedagogic thing that the government in Seoul has done. At almost all the bus stops in Seoul, there are statues of elderly women dressed in the ways that comfort women were dressed. So this is actually a statue of a former comfort woman. Okay? So while you're waiting for the bus during rush hour, looking around, bored, the bus isn't there yet, you are standing next to a comfort woman. But that's not all. As you get on the bus, there is the bus driver's seat on this side, and then a single seat over here. And that single seat is inhabited not by an older representation of the comfort woman, but by a younger statue of a comfort woman. This is one of the best examples of critical pedagogic reality of space I have seen. So the historic amnesia is happening. Right-wing governments have said it is too important for Korea economically for Korea to ask reparations from Japan because we need their market, or we need the students in Japan to love K-pop. So we will not put K-pop. People understand K-pop? Definitely, thank you. Certainly people have, some of you may have seen TikTok, I'm not sure. I couldn't resist that, I'm sorry. Okay, we've had these conversations before in class. But here we have a politics of space and biography, a pedagogic form that is not on curriculum per se, but the public restoration of real culture and real bodies. It is almost the exact opposite of what went on in the Indian unscheduled caste village. This is something that says women's lives also have a history, and we must interrupt not simply by having text material on how it was during the Japanese occupation, where 5 of my students from Korea, PhD students, their parents were not allowed to have Korean names. They had to have Japanese names, and they were forbidden from speaking Korean. So they formed adult academies hidden in barns, in factories, basements, to keep their culture alive. But here we have the loss of memory, the historical amnesia of real lives of women. So that even those people who say we shouldn't be changing the curriculum, that is right-wing people in Korea, and there are people there, 48%, who would have voted for someone like Bolsonaro, and their president just tried to do a military coup. So this is not anything that's unheard of before. They do, even parts of the right say, that was my grandmother. I don't believe we should have that memory erased. Clear? Okay. And I think this tells us something here that is very important. What can we do architecturally? Not necessarily in schools that we want women's toilets, but what can we do to restore the memories of struggle of people in favelas, of women's groups, of Afro-Brazilian continued struggles. How do we have not just the museums that are official, what are other spaces that can engage in pedagogical work? And that actually, I think, is very, very important for those of us in education. What are the other spaces? And this means, again, that the blending together of immense amount of disciplines into new discourses becomes crucial. How do we teach each other and have new discursive traditions and universities that enable us to engage with these things? And it's one of the reasons that IET becomes even more important internationally, because here is an example of people in architecture, in the arts, in women's studies, solving together something that is absolutely crucial to people's lives. Okay? So, and it also restores agency to women. And everyday life is a place for educational experiences. Okay? Third story. My favorite, because this is a total success as well in a really hard environment. I want us to get on a plane, go to Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, I almost slipped out the president's name. This is the city of Baltimore. It's about 1.5 million people. It is the third poorest city in the United States. 70 to 80% of its population are poor, and 70 to 80% of that population are African American, or as we say, Latino or Latino. Okay? It is large immigrant population, very poor, and also Afro-Caribbean, from Barbados, the Bajans, etc. The state has huge budget cuts. It doesn't have enough money to pay for teachers' salaries. Teachers have not had a raise in 3 years. Okay? The schools, the air conditioning is broken. It's a very difficult situation. The teachers' union is very militant, but they are militant about working conditions and less so about curriculum. And they have established in this context of large budget cuts, money has gone from schools, health care for the elderly. Okay? I have to do this. Some of you have seen me do this before. Neoliberal agendas say weak state. Everything should be for profits. Turn everything over to profit making. Okay? Fine. No government control. It's under the control of capital. This is the budget of Baltimore. This half is healthcare, curriculum, teachers' salaries, transportation, etc. This is what it looks like now. This side is prisons. And the plan here, remember I said 1 out of every 4 African-American young men is now or has been or will be in prison, and 1 out of every 11 African-American women will be in the same situation. Okay? So the state government has said the following. That money that went for teachers, healthcare, etc., that's a waste of money. Schools are not very efficient and effective. We want to cut the budgets and give the money over to what schools actually produce. Not jobs, but prisoners. And those prisons have working class people as guards, many of them white, guarding black young men and women. That could never happen in other countries, of course. I couldn't resist that. Okay? So the money is going to construct a new juvenile prison in the community. Am I clear? Okay. That's the future. in the high school, there is a new curriculum called the Algebra Project. It is a group of Black men and women who believe that mathematics is absolutely central to counter-hegemonic schooling, to critically democratic schooling. And one of the major reasons is in the United States, to go from remedial education to regular education, there is one subject that is the sorting device, and that is mathematics. So if you were on elementary school, and then what we call junior high school or middle school, and you were going to a secondary school, what floor you go on, what courses you take, are dependent on one subject. What is your score on the regional mathematics examination? And these minoritized groups and minoritized teachers have said, we will teach mathematics to these youth. We cannot allow any more youth to engage in what in English we call the school to prison pipeline. It's like a tunnel. And they are influenced by Antonio Gramsci. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Antonio. I plan to join him later on. And they have said the problem is that mathematics is taught in a way that is not connected to the lives of youth. They probably know a lot of math that is not recognized as mathematics, or they think it has no part of their future. So they engage with the youth. They don't start teaching mathematics. They use some of my work and some of Palafreri's work, and a huge and long attempt by African American mathematicians to base the mathematics that is taught on the daily lives, just like people's science in rural areas in India and in Brazil, with the landless movement, where people's daily experiences become core parts of the curriculum and the teaching, and the same as the chair with indigenous schooling and education here. Okay? So they say to the students, following again Paolo and Michael, you'll forgive me for doing that. I was a friend, I miss him still, and we didn't always agree. And it was the best conversations I've ever had in my life. Okay, all right. So they have the students sit and talk. What are the real problems you're facing in your life? It's critical pedagogy. Okay? And for 3 days, the youth are talking. And slowly they come to a consensus that it's actually the fact that there are no places in the community where the police are not present, making life, I quote, you'll forgive these words I'm quoting now, fucking hell for us. That sort of gets your attention. And some teachers would say, what did you say? That's not the issue. So what you have there is a student saying, there are no basketball courts. There's no real football, soccer, places to play. We can only hang out on street corners. And every time there are more than 3 of us, the police car stops and says, up against the wall. And we are searched. And they assume that all of us are drug dealers. It could be Rio de Janeiro. Okay? You'll forgive me. I want also to learn about what happens here. So, the youth are then taught what the standard mandatory curriculum is, but now it's going to be stopping the new prison. So the mandatory curriculum in Baltimore at this time is elementary statistics, mean, mode, standard deviation, that can be quite boring. But it also can be really challenging and powerful when you ask who pays the largest percentage of taxes from their income, rich people or poor people? Turns out in the slums, poor people do. And in the slums of Black communities, it's almost half their income. And how much does the government spend on each student in the wealthy part of the community versus in our poor schools? It's 3 times as much. So the youth are beginning to accumulate these data in powerful ways. And they're beginning to connect it with where my grandmother no longer has health care, but the people, and if we need anything, we go to the emergency room and wait 3 to 4 hours before a nurse will see us, and maybe we'll never get to see a doctor. It's not nice. So they're beginning to understand how mathematics can be used to understand daily life. They then make a connection with critical journalists, with the Occupy movement, with community activists, with Mathematics for Social Justice, which is a national organization in the United States and here as well with similarities. And they, in many ways, how can I say this? They interrupt the stereotypes. Most people who are white and who are journalists have this stereotype of Black young men in particular. They don't care about schools, they're undisciplined, they're troublemakers in school. Well, now these are the knowers. These are the knowers, the people who are now teaching their own teachers and the journalists and the podcasters, that these are people who are not only human, but who can control their own lives. These are now the knowers. They build alliances with creative use of media, and there is a victory. There is no new prison in Baltimore. Let me repeat that. The prison pipeline is bricked up. It's not there. We need to be the secretaries of these kinds of things. We have created new identities, not just for them, but for us. They have taken a crucial subject matter in education that most of us believe is really, really important for interruption and to make the next step in schooling. And they have proven, documented, that if you trust them and connect it to the real lives of real people, it can change their lives, the lives of their brothers and sisters, and the lives of mathematics teachers as well. Okay? Okay. So what are the lessons learned on this? I don't think I'm going to have time. I'll do a very brief thing about the fourth one. As the writers demonstrated, everything counts. Teaching, curriculum, kids also count. We tend to think, who can interrupt this stuff? These are students interrupting it. That tells us something very important about the power of anti-racist work, but the power of mathematical literacy as a form of interruption. We also know that the right never sleeps. The right saw the Black community mobilizing, so they said, let's take the money from them As they say, we want to fund the makers, not the takers. So the right never sleeps. It will try and interrupt any victory we get. So gains and victories can be temporary. Sometimes they fail because there's no toilets. Sometimes they succeed because we imagined a new thing in a new space. We put a new space there, called a statue, called an occupied bus seat. Okay. And that means we need to think long term. What is required in that poor rural village for that generation of children to succeed? It requires that we keep putting pressure on Delhi, India, and not be satisfied with the new bathrooms that they have so nicely given us that are for the boys. It means that our work never stops. And that means Giulio has corrected me about this, and students in my class about these words, that we have to look at what I call reformist versus non-reformist reforms. In English, a reformist reform is sort of good, but it's weak. An example would be lower class size for teachers, or more time to plan, or working with a community. But we have a non-reformist reform is, if we think of this like a ladder, it's the first step, did it open the next door? Right? If it didn't open the next door, it's not enough. And that means we need what I call longitudinal research. We need to follow these transformations for at least 10 years to see whether what we are doing is working. Okay? So we also need to understand the larger context, even things like the absence of toilets. Now, most teachers and administrators don't think about toilets. When I went to high school, we thought about toilets a lot. It's where we went to smoke when the teacher didn't know where we were. And we learned to hold our breath when a teacher came in to urinate. So we loved the toilets because poor boys needed to show how masculine they were by smoking. You'll forgive the humor, but let me remind you, toilets may be important also to the children. But the most important thing is, who would think about, as a teacher, as an administrator, are there toilets for the youth? That's normally not on my agenda. There's more to think about. And obviously, what we teach and how we teach it matter to real students and real communities. Then lessons learned too. This is one of the most important things I can say, and it's really the conclusion about can education change society. Let me just read it. It's important to remember that the right would not be so angry about schools, about curriculum, about teachers, and progressive community activists if there weren't some very significant democratic gains already in the lives of schools. Why would the right be so angry? Why would Bolsonaro and Donald, I won't say the last name, be so angry at teachers? Why would they think about schools without party if there weren't real things going on in schools, in favelas, even in some private schools where there's counter-hegemonic stuff going on? So let us take the right seriously. They are giving us a compliment. The compliment is, we will take from you, we will try and take from you everything we can, because we are doing things that they don't like. So acting back against their agenda is crucial. And the work of educators continues. Schools are key parts of society. Pessimism, which is too often there, leads to paralysis. There are risks in our actions, but all of us in this room and outside it cannot and must not and will not be silent. Thank you.